So amino acids, if you've taken analytical chem, you've seen these before, but they are sort of nature's common polyprotic acid. And they always have an alpha carbon that is central to the structure, where you have a carboxyl group with a pKa of roughly 2 and an ammonium ion that, when fully protonated, is positively charged with a pKa of 9, maybe 10. Sometimes the substituent chain has a third pKa. But not always. So there are 20 amino acids that are naturally occurring, and you don't need to know any of the structures by heart. You'll be given the structures. But of those 20, about 7 of them have an acidic or ionizable side chain. And the part that differs between the 20 is just what this functional group is.